Welcome to our green space for Echoing Green. A lot of green tonight. And joining me on the stage is Rohit Malhotra, Amanda Alexander, and Daryl Scott. And I'm going to give you a longer introduction in just a moment, but I can't have them just sit here without introducing them, so give them a round of applause. So this is our counter State of the Union programming for tonight. Right. Thank you. How y'all doing tonight? Come on, how y'all doing tonight? How y'all doing?
Good.
Awesome. All right. We had fun back there. We were having so much fun, we thought we would just bring our conversation about what good television is out there to you, but that's not why you're here tonight. This is the first night of a series that we're doing with Echoing Green. It's our second year of doing the series. Where's Cheryl Dorsey? Hello, Cheryl.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hey. We're going to talk more about Cheryl Dorsey, my friend, later tonight. We're going to talk about inspiring, highly motivated people and how they are changing the world. And we're going to meet them and hear about what they're doing at the ground level to make this world a better place. Tonight's a good night to do that. We'll talk about how they perceive the state of our union. And I guess we'll start with Rohit. He is the founder and executive director of the Center for Civic Innovation in his hometown, Atlanta.
Woo! A-Town.
Right. Hey. A-Town. CCI invests in locally grown solutions to civic challenges in the Atlanta metro area, a region that is both home to some of the world's most successful companies, but also some of the highest income inequality rates in the country. And Rohit is working to end that disparity. And in a moment, he'll tell us how. Amanda Alexander is the founder of the Detroit Justice Center. And she's also a racial justice attorney. She's worked alongside community-based movements to end mass incarceration and build thriving and inclusive cities. And we'll hear more from Amanda in just a moment. And to my right is Daryl Scott. Give me a hand, Daryl. We've become fast friends. He's the co-founder and executive director of Push Black. Rhymes with pushback, just in case you missed my articulation. The nation's first mobile-based Black organizing group. Push Black sends daily Black history stories and news to subscribers. Yes, you can subscribe. And activates them to vote during elections. Welcome to all three of you. And welcome to all of you. So let's start with our topic tonight, civic engagement, and with Rohit. Rohit, what led you to found the Center for Civic Innovation in Atlanta?
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be up here in New York. It's a little colder than in Atlanta. I grew up with two immigrant parents who gave me the greatest privilege I could ever ask for, which is to grow up poor without knowing I'm poor. And my parents were entrepreneurs, and I always like to think about them during moments like this, and they are at the core why I do what I do. The first time my mother was ever on an airplane was a one-way ticket from New Delhi, India to Chicago, Illinois. And she was there to see her knight in shining armor. My dad, he put an ad in the paper in India and was like, I need a wife. And my mom's parents were like, all right, we're down, and we're gonna send our daughter. And so she's like, this is gonna be amazing, America. This is gonna be so great. She got out of the airport expecting a big, nice car, but my dad got off of a bus. He's like, we got to take this, and we got another one to catch. And they went back to the south side of Chicago, where my dad had a small studio apartment. I always laughingly say my dad had two roommates, loneliness and a cockroach. And we were poor. And my dad said, it's all good, though. I'm going to be a lawyer. It's all going to work out. And so my dad actually started taking classes at a small community college while my first few weeks of my parents being back in the U.S. together. And within the first few weeks, my dad was jumped on the street, beaten, dragged across the street, taken back to that small studio apartment, tied to a chair, and left there unconscious. And so my mom was like, look, when we have a kid, we're out. We're leaving. And so I was born, and they went back to India, and within a few weeks, they were like, never mind, we're definitely going back to the United States. And they said, look, though, this time is going to be a little bit different. So my dad took a suitcase. We had one suitcase for all of us, and he went around from bazaar to bazaar to bazaar, put every little trinket he could find inside of that suitcase, and he saved $75, and he did his first trade show in Buffalo, New York. And I remember we got an apartment right across from the convention hall. My mom and I were pacing back and forth in the room while my dad was at the trade show. We were like, all right, Dad's gonna be home soon. Dad's gonna be home soon. Dad's gonna be home soon. And then my dad came back with that suitcase in his hand. And we were like, damn it. This time was supposed to be different. It was supposed to work this time. And my dad took that suitcase, he put it in front of my mother, he unzipped it, and there was nothing inside. And he said, we sold everything. There are a few moments in your life that you just remember for the rest of your life. The first time you see your parents cry is one of those moments. And my parents are entrepreneurs who took such a unique approach to problem solving. They would never call themselves an entrepreneur. And Atlanta is filled with people like that, filled with incredible people who are fighting their way out of poverty and using entrepreneurship as a tool to do that. And cities around the country have people like that as assets. So the reason I started this was for them and the home that they gave me. And I have a responsibility to make sure that that home is just as good for me as it is for every single person that also calls it home.
Beautiful story. You know, the first time I ever heard the term social entrepreneur was from Cheryl Dorsey, and it was in connection with this organization years and years ago, Echo and Green. What does that phrase social entrepreneur mean to you, Rohit?
Yeah, you know, I think few years ago when we were in Atlanta, we went around and we would ask, you know, hey, did you know you're a social entrepreneur? They're like, I don't throw parties. What are you talking about? Like, you know, I'm a real promoter. But it's a, you know, social entrepreneur to me is about the people who are doing the work. It's about people who have an end game in mind. They have a North Star. And I always say that social entrepreneurship is not just a new class of business. It's a mindset. It's about taking a certain set of tools that we know to have and to make problem solving in our communities valuable again. The reason why, if we valued education and people's justice the same exact way that we valued trinkets and widgets, then we would be a lot closer to that point of equity and equity for everybody. But truth is that we pick and choose what gets to be valuable in the market. And a part of what a social entrepreneur's charge is to make something that is currently not valuable in the market have value. And what that allows us to do is actually use the tools that are at our disposals to say you can't have a city, you cannot say a city like Atlanta is thriving economically if we have the graduation rates that we have, if this many people are being locked up for petty crimes. Like that is unacceptable. And I think we need to introduce that back into the way we talk about economics. And I think that's exactly what social entrepreneurs do. They bring value to things that we have to value as a local economy.
Thank you for that. Amanda, you grew up in Michigan. You've lived all over the country, right? So what drew you back to your home state and to Detroit, and what does social entrepreneurship mean to you, and what led you to launch the Detroit Justice Center?
Sure. So good evening, everyone. It's really good to be here. I will get to that question about coming back to Detroit and to Michigan, but I think I have a confession to make. So I always find the idea of civic engagement a little stale, a little difficult to connect with. And so in case other people are feeling that too, I just wanted to put that in the room. It tends to feel a little abstract, a little sterile, because it's about the relationship between citizens and the state, right? And I'm used to thinking about relationship building and building power and movement building, and that's about the relationships between people. And I think that's what social change is about. You know, it's about relationship building. It's relationships that give us courage. And I think that that's what this is about. You know, we need to be brave and courageous and challenging the status quo. So to me, that has been a question of movement building. And so I'm a lawyer, but an organizer, you know, at my core, a student of social movements. And so I you know, have thought back on, you know, what has tended to hold people together, you know, and what change looked like over the long term. And if you look at something like the Montgomery bus boycott, you know, that was 381 days of people working together to make change. That is not what I remember from my history classes. You know, I think that we think about, you know, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, then maybe a few weeks later, you know, the buses were integrated. You know? But when you actually look at it, it was 381 days. It was over a year of people setting up an alternative transit system for the city of Montgomery. People like Georgia Gilmore, she was a domestic worker and a cook who decided to do you know, kind of a bake sale, and plowing those profits back into the movement to sustain this transit system over that course of that year. So again, it just comes back to these thick relationships and people holding each other down and making change happen. And I talk to students, so I'm also a teacher at University of Michigan. I teach law and social change, and my students will say, well, we're in a different age now. You know, it might have been about relationship building and movement building back in the day, but now we have Twitter. And to some extent that is true. You know, we have different tools now, but it's still very much about organizing and movement building. So, you know, last week we have the great news out of Florida, that Floridians will have the decision come November to vote on a ballot initiative to restore voting rights to 1.5 million Floridians with criminal records who right now are not able to vote. And this is huge. It's a huge deal. I mean, we know what role Florida has played in our national elections. So having 1.5 million people, you know, mostly black men at the polls, that'll be huge. And that happened because of someone named Desmond Meade and his organization, Floridians for a Fair Economy, who spent years collecting over 800,000 signatures on a petition to make it possible for this to go to the ballot. And Desmond is formerly incarcerated himself. He has a criminal record. This is very personal to him. He talks about the fact that his wife ran for office and he couldn't vote for her because of this criminal conviction. And so that was the type of thing, that kind of personal relationship that sustained him, I bet, day after day, collecting signatures. So all of that to say, as someone who is deeply fired up about movements and people-powered solutions, there is no place I would rather be than Detroit. I spent a lot of time on the East Coast and was in South Africa for many years, and kind of thought that I would stay in Brooklyn, or that Oakland would be the promised land. And it felt like in Brooklyn it was a lot of defensive battles. So I felt like we were often kind of holding this corner of Brooklyn back from gentrification. And I wanted to be somewhere where people were thinking in really visionary ways about the future of cities, the future of post-industrial cities, and that is happening in Detroit in a way like it is not anywhere else that I've ever been. And so, you know, when I moved back about 5 years ago, Detroit was about to file for the largest ever municipal bankruptcy. And it occurred to me that people couldn't seem to decide whether we were 50 years ahead or 50 years behind the rest of the country. And it's clear to me that we're 50 years ahead in terms of some of the solutions that we've had to work out of necessity. So, for example, I have neighbors who saw the grocery stores leave and suddenly saw overgrown fields where there used to be dense neighborhoods and decided that they didn't want to leave, but they had to feed themselves. And so they were going to start urban agriculture and farming. And so they're 15 years ahead when it comes to urban agricultural movements and building a local food system and movements around food sovereignty. And that is wisdom that I think needs to ripple out to other cities. But the thing is now that that land is valuable to developers in a way that it was not before. And so that's some of the work of the Justice Center will kind of help people shore up their land claims and set up community land trust, should they decide to do that. Some of the other solutions, so right now in Detroit, 40% of Detroiters do not have access to the internet. So when you talk about this digital divide, these are questions of justice, of the right to communication. And just because the big telecoms decided that this was not an infrastructure worth investing in, 40% of Detroiters don't have it. And yet, the Detroit Community Technology Project has decided they weren't just going to sit by and let that happen. So they've set up community-controlled, locally run internet, to get internet service to people in the city, and to really frame it around questions of community control, the right to communication, and digital justice. I could go on and on with all sorts of examples like this, but that's really the work that I see in terms of the Justice Center is shoring up people-powered solutions like this. And I think we have an opportunity in Detroit to do things differently than they've been done, in Brooklyn, as much as I love it, or Oakland. I think we can decide that that's what the future of cities looks like, or we can decide that we're going to build cities in a way that they're equitable and affordable for generations to come, where we don't leave people behind. And so that's the work that I think we're after in Detroit.
You mentioned Brooklyn and Oakland. Do you want, or is it your hope, or is it even now the fact that the Justice Center can be a model for other urban centers? Yeah,
I think I would love that, and that is something that we're kind of actively, thinking about, kind of working through lessons. Like I said, lessons in Detroit that I think are applicable not because every city is going to experience the bottoming out of American capitalism the way that Detroit did, but in terms of thinking about solutions rooted in resiliency, sustainability, absolutely. I think that those are models.
So we can continue tonight talking about some of that. But for now, Daryl, let me come to you. And let's talk about Push Black, which I think you launched in 2015.
That's right.
So let's talk about what inspired that, why you've called it Push Black. Tell us a bit about what led you to the work, about the organizational mission, and your entrepreneurial approach to social change.
Yeah. Everything just kind of came to a head. People often in the Echo and Green interviews, they talk about what was your moment, or like that you kind of came to be. And so for me, I thought it was a series of moments. And I think about Trayvon. I think about Troy Davis. But I really think about Gina Six. And in Louisiana, my friends and I in college, we took a bus down. We were marching in front of the courthouses to figure out what's going on. I was about to curse, sorry. What's going on? And I think with Mike Brown, it just kind of everything came to a head. And I remember being just very angry and very pissed. And Bell Hooks has a book about rage and how do you make your rage productive. And so I was like, okay, I can't just sit around and just be mad all day. Let me do something with it. And so I was complaining, as I usually do, to one of my friends who's our co-founder, Tarek, and I was like, yo, I'm mad about this. And he's like, well, let's do something. He's like, you figure it out. You go figure out how to make sure we can live, and I'll come do it. And that's really how it started, is sitting 2 doors down from my house at a restaurant, me just being upset and not knowing what to do with it, until a good friend of mine was like, we can do something about this if you just put your mind to it. And that's where we started. I am fascinated and just have always been a fan of Black media. I was the guy who was at the beauty salon with my mom every Saturday, with my head buried inside of Ebony magazine, and Essence magazine, the Black Hair magazine, Essence, what do they call it? The Essence Fashion Fair or something like that.
Fashion Fair and Jet.
And Jet. I'm the guy. To this day, I have subscriptions to all. It makes zero sense. Yeah, I still have Ebony magazine showing up in my porch.
But you valued the power of that media.
Well, it all comes back to the civil rights movement. And so we had a megaphone. During the civil rights movement, there were dozens, if not probably 50, 60, 70 different Black-led publications that the digital media and publishing changed, right? We don't have the Courier anymore, Philadelphia Courier. We don't have, we have the Crisis magazine still, sort of, kind of, it's just all these publications that were translating our pain into something productive are gone. And a lot of it has to do with it. Media is not the best business to get into. I don't know why I'm really doing that, but it's, you have limited opportunities for revenue generation. It just really isn't the best business. And so it's not surprising that, particularly when you switch over to digital, it's not an easy thing. And so I think we all kind of deserve to have a publication, and not just ours. I want there to be multiple. I want everybody to have a publication. I think we should all like have more out there, or else other people will be saying what they want to say.
So you sort of just answered your own question. You said, I don't know why I'm getting into it, but then you are explaining to us why you're getting into it, because you think it's important and valuable and necessary?
Sure.
Is that right?
That's right. I mean, yes, that's right. I have more to that answer, but like,
well, please say more.
It's a little maniacal. Like, so it's just like it all comes down to propaganda, and so we're trying to push out a certain kind of message. We're trying to be radically inclusive. We are trying to talk about civic engagement in a way that's not boring and stale. We're trying to think through how do we have like these year-long conversations about democracy, not these 2-week conversations that the Democratic Party would like you to have, you know, when they want to throw all this money 2 weeks before an election. And so we're trying to figure out how do we like actually have conversations with people and really figure out how to talk to them and understand them and hear them. And that's what we're trying to do.
Oh, so much I want to ask. Okay, I gotta stay on message here. Okay, I'm coming back to you. But I do want to ask, I'm coming over to you, Rohit. When you're trying to engage people and motivate them, how important is it to meet them where they are? And I guess this also just comes right off of what you were saying, where they are. Does that create a more personal relationship with them on their phones, online, community organizations? I guess this is a question really all of you could address. How, when you're doing your work, do you try to engage with the folks you're trying to reach?
Yeah, you know, my favorite saying is the things that are built for us without us are not for us. And it is fundamental inside of civic engagement to have people at the center of it. That when you leave people out of the process, they don't feel like what comes out of it is even theirs. It doesn't feel like it matters. And we have completely disconnected from people. We watch, you know, I believe everything happens locally. And when I watch what's happening in Atlanta, we have one of the strongest and oldest forms of community engagement in the country. When Maynard Jackson was elected mayor, he created something called the neighborhood planning units as a part of the charter system in Atlanta. And it was purposely created so that people's voices who were disproportionately not being heard could be heard, and particularly Black voices. And as it became less and less convenient to hear what people were going through and what they have going on in their lives, that system has also started to unravel. It slowly started to lose funding, its leadership structure started to move away, and now you can use things called sovereign immunity to actually bypass it when you want to make a decision quickly without necessarily having to go through the process of listening to people.
Less convenient for the government, essentially.
The decision makers,
right.
Yeah, for whatever reasons
state and
that
local.
may be. And there's a lot of reasons. Like if you've worked inside of government, you realize that it is hard to do good civic engagement. But it's not impossible. And I think a part of what we found and what we've learned is that we can't just do this work around elections. Elections themselves are just moments. But we can't get so caught up in those moments that we forget what it actually takes to make a movement. Those movements are built after moment, generation after generation that is fought. But I live in a city that names every street after civil rights leaders that fought for the Voter Rights Act, with a city that can't cross 30% in voter turnout. Like, we all do, right? And I think that I say that with pride. That's my city. And I'm an Indian kid in a dominantly Black city where white people's voices are stronger than the dominant majority. It's a very complicated place to live. I think that, but what's happening in cities is people are taking ownership again. And so I think that the digital piece that you hit on is important, but people themselves are not data points.
Right.
People come with cultures and traditions, and we've seen when you base decision making solely on data, what can happen. We saw it in the mortgage crisis. We saw it how healthcare is actually rolled out, because we forget that people have gone through a lot, have been promised a lot, and data doesn't always tell the full story.
So, Amanda, in terms of organizing, how do we ensure that the digital technology is a tool that is useful, but doesn't become, a means to an end, but doesn't become the end in itself?
Right. And so I think this is where it comes back to this question of how do we build really thick and deep relationships.
Right.
So yes, it's amazing to meet folks on Twitter and to kind of get a message out across the world, and to recognize that there are people in South Africa who are fighting around housing segregation some of the same ways that we are in Detroit, or water struggles that are global, and to be connected, that's amazing. But at the same time, I think a lot about what it takes to really show up for people, in Detroit. I think a lot about what it means to mentor. So in some ways, I feel like my generation is missing in Detroit. So I'm, mid-30s, and I look around and there are not a lot of other people who have made this decision to move back home. And so I am actively thinking about how do I show up for 25-year-olds and for 11-year-olds, and the best advice that I got on this mentoring question was from early 20-something-year-old young activist in Detroit. And she said, I consider myself a great mentor. And I was like, really? Tell me about that. And she said, have you ever seen me show up anywhere alone? I said, I haven't. She always has her 13, 14-year-olds in tow. Whenever she's at an event, she's introducing them to people, she's giving them the mic, and so I learned a ton from her in terms of what it means to really build relationships with young people or across generations. I try and have this practice of asking people questions that I could only ask of them. Like, what is the one thing I could learn only from this person? And so often that leads to interesting questions with elders in Detroit. So I'll ask what do you remember of this block from when you were growing up? That isn't something I can Google, I can't read a tweet about that, but I can, just kind of listen to their lived experiences and their memories of this place. And so I think just remaining attuned to these kind of basics of relationship building that just can't happen in that way online.
Yeah. And yet, Daryl, we still, especially in the work you're doing, appreciate the power of the internet and of media. And you're seeking subscribers. You use that word propaganda. I noticed that. But not necessarily in a bad way.
It can be positive.
It can be. We have to recognize it's there. We hear this phrase, Black Twitter, all the time, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you that same question. How can we be sure that it's a tool in our hand rather than, but that we're not becoming so consumed with it that we lose sense of the eye-to-eye contact and the human relationship?
Yeah.
Right?
So, who all has a phone in here? Everybody got a phone?
You should ask who doesn't have a phone.
Who doesn't have a phone, right? How many of y'all are on Facebook Messenger? Raise your hand. Okay, majority of this room is on Facebook Messenger. So there are 1 billion people on Facebook Messenger, right? So about 22 million of them are Black. And we are constantly trying to target them and have conversations with them. So yes, we need to be doing offline things, but we need to be doing online things as well, because that's where people are. A lot of people spend their waking hours on their phones. African Americans and Latinx people spend more time on their phones, and we over-index for a lot of times. That's our sole purpose, not purpose, but way and avenue for getting the internet. So we care about meeting people where they are.
Our phone is our way of accessing
our phone
the
is,
internet.
Yeah, our phone is where people are. And so that's where that's what we're doing. Now, we are a multi-channel organization, so we are on email, we are on text message, we are on Facebook Messenger, we're on social media, because we want to be everywhere that every person is. Because Facebook Messenger is set up the way that it is, we're able to talk to people every single day. So we are trying to build deep, trusted, daily relationships with people. we're talking to folks every single day. We send an article every single day. So it's not weird when you hear from me or hear from my team talking about civic engagement, but we don't use that word, right? So like, it's not weird for us to be like, hey, yo, are you registered?
Right, because the goal is action.
Yeah.
The goal isn't, hey, yo, it's really good that you're sitting here on your phone again. The goal is, election day is coming up.
Right.
Are you registered?
And it's actually not a weird thing because we do a lot of Black history, but Black history is not a huge jump from like civic engagement, because to be Black in America is to be politicized, is to be like within this whole political structure. I mean, you're rolling through Atlanta, every single street is a civil rights leader. It's crazy.
Right.
Even to the airport in Atlanta,
That's
like
so
it's like a museum. Like it's wild. And so for us, it's not even like that of a stretch for us.
So it is critically important, am I right, that for Push Black to create, that you want to create engagement?
Yeah.
That you want some social pressure?
So what I would say is
that a goal?
We do media, right? So we're doing media every single day, and we work with a lot of local partners in different states because they're doing great on the ground grassroots work. And so we don't want them to duplicate their efforts. We want them to keep doing the great work that they're doing and let us just help them, and we can be a utility. So in Florida, we're working with New Florida Majority. In Georgia, we're working with New Georgia Project. In North Carolina, we're working with Blueprint North Carolina. So like, for us, it's like, let's find out what people are already doing, and we can just use our platform to help them out.
Okay.
So while we are online, we appreciate and understand the offline piece of it, and so we want to make sure that we can like push it forward.
All right, so speaking of push it forward, 30%, what can be done to get more people to, let's just talk brass tacks, more people to the polls?
Yeah, I mean, we spent, the Center for Civic Innovation believes that, look, you can't invest in these outcome-driven, community-led ideas if your civic infrastructure is not strong. And so we spent last year trying to create a conversation. And it actually started off by us just saying, we want to interview every candidate for mayor. There were 13 candidates for mayor in the election. And so we sat down with each and every one of them for 90 minutes. And we learned about who they are, what they stand for, what their vision of the city is. And then we had all this content. And we said, okay, so where should we put this? And then we said, well, there's nowhere to put it. So we just created this site called voteatl.org. And then people would come up and be like, wait a second, you mean the mayor doesn't have anything to do with the school board? And we're like, we actually need to create Civics 101 trainings for people so that they can understand there must be something out there that does that. There wasn't. So we created that from the ground up. What you find is that all of these journalists and local journalists especially, they don't have the resources to even be a beat reporter anymore. We used to know what was happening on a daily basis, but people are so disconnected outside of those elections. So we actually treated the elections as a job interview. We interviewed them, and then we took them to they went to a place called Dad's Garage, which is a comedy cellar. We went there and we did a full-on comedy and improv thing with 13 candidates for mayor. And we had them do failure bows where they had to get up and be like, I was unethical. And then we were like, yay, good job. And they had to build on one another's ideas, where someone had to say, well, I want to do this. And you would have to say, yes, and I would also do this. And the current mayor who was elected, Ms. Lance Bottoms was very, very good in that setting. She connected with people to show that, look, I don't have all the answers all the time, but I'm willing to connect with you. And so part of it is humanizing people. But I'll tell you, looking back, when those numbers hit, there were some really key things that happened that I wish we could have prevented against. Number one, grassroots organizations that are on the ground are only empowered by investors and supporters during election time. Therefore, they have to build all of their capacity in a very short period of time, and they fall short. They can't get to the point of collaborating with one another because outside of the elections, we don't see them as valuable. Then number two, we have to empower local journalists. We have to let them tell those stories even when they're harsh. And we can't let the bully pulpit take the word bully more seriously than the word pulpit, because what you have is such a adversarial relationship between city halls and their local politics, because they don't like how they're being reported against. And it's a huge mess.
You mean between
there.
City Hall and the local press?
And the local press.
Right.
And the last thing I would say is that we need political parties to stay out of local elections when they are nonpartisan. Atlanta was a nonpartisan race. It had 13 candidates, and because no one achieved over 50% of the vote, it went to a runoff. When the runoff actually happened, all these grassroots organizations said, we're doing it. We're getting people out. We anticipate we're gonna shatter records this year. But what happened 30 days before the election was, all of a sudden, when people should have been thinking about a tax bill that was being passed, they started flying down to Atlanta and creating a divide between people. Oh, the white candidate? She's a Republican. Oh, the black candidate, she only is going to vote for whatever this past mayor did. Oh, she believes in trickle-down economics. Like, all these words that we put against people, and people just decided, you know what? I'm not going to vote. And when we talked to people, they were like, I guess the election's already been decided, because I'm not going to vote for somebody who I've already been told if I vote for them, I now get cataloged as somebody. That was one of the most dangerous and disappointing things that I saw happen in a local election, was people being divided when ideologically people in Atlanta are not that divided in the way they want the city to grow and be. But it was done through politics and propaganda. I think we need to prevent against that for future elections.
So ultimately, despite terrific efforts by your organization and others, and equal time, which is a wonderful thing, which we want to see more of, equal time for 13 candidates.
Yeah.
Your numbers at the polls didn't go up. Your percentage did not go up.
No, it's heartbreaking, because in 2009, the election was decided by 714 votes. And this time it was no better. So we're sitting there counting 714 votes. When people say their voice doesn't matter, you can point to that and say it absolutely does. That's smaller than most Indian weddings. So it is actually a statistic that we need to pay attention to. Like, you could come out. I mean, there were thousands of people at Beyonce, but then I was there, I was in the front, got the socks, but you sit there, and when it comes to elections, people have just turned off. They've said, I don't want to get involved.
Amanda, I want to come to you on this because you mentioned the bus boycott, and I often reference the march on Selma, 3 marches, in fact, not one. People risking their lives, and many people dying, of course, during Freedom Summer. What about good old-fashioned tactics, door knocking, registration? We have the internet, and people are marching at the Women's March, but what about traditional voter registration drives, get out the vote activities? Do we need to get back to basics?
So I think beyond getting out the vote, I would say right now we're in end of January, elections coming up in November. We have the opportunity right now. People are starting to declare that they're going to run.
So yes, in fact, 400 women, and I'm doing that interruption thing, so forgive me, but let me just interject a number. 400 women planning to run for the House of Representatives this year. 22 non-incumbent African-American women I put out there, and 50 women who plan to run for the Senate. But please do continue.
Yeah. So this has been one of the most exciting things about
I thought you'd be excited.
Elections.
That's why I interrupted.
Actually, yeah. I mean, and nationally, tens of thousands of women have stepped up and said they want to run.
Yes.
And so I think that is going to be, it's a whole other conversation about how I think this is going to remake politics in some way, because it's not just going to be about how can I support a candidate by donating money, whatever it is. I think that we can find other ways beyond that of showing up and supporting these candidates. So in talking with friends of mine who have run for office in Southeast Michigan, one woman said, what I needed most as a candidate, it was donations. Yes, we needed to fundraise, but I also needed someone to walk my dog 4 times a day so that I could be out campaigning. I needed someone to change my tire. I needed someone to all these other ways that neighbors and folks could show up to support women to run for office. So I think it'll be interesting to think about what engagement comes to mean when it's about getting progressive women elected. I was going to say though, I think it can't just be about this race in the lead up to November, but thinking right now, we can decide what these elections are going to be about, particularly when it comes to local office. So I would say, start to follow who is declaring to run for judge and prosecutor and sheriff, county commissioner. These are the officials who basically run the mill into mass incarceration.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about Ferguson, that was a lot about the local officials
exactly
who were running that mill.
Well, March is coming up, and we have the DA's race in Dallas, right? So, like, there are all these elections that are going to happen before November 2018.
Yeah, there's the primaries in August, and so, I think that we have this opportunity to say, if you want our vote, prosecutor, you need to implement a restorative justice program. We can make those demands. We can decide what these elections are going to be about, and I think that people get really excited about that. I mean, we saw incredible things in Cleveland, in Chicago, of people ousting prosecutors because they were not, following up on. They were leaving police on the streets and failing to indict officers, or failing to charge officers, after police shootings and things. So they decided, you're not going to be our prosecutor anymore, and we're going to organize to make that so. And importantly, they did not endorse the people that they elected necessarily. They said, yes, we like you better than the person that we got out, but we will also hold you accountable as well. And so I think that this is, precisely the moment to start thinking about what are our demands? What are we going to organize for to make these people deliver in November?
Daryl, please.
We have a wave right now, right? So it's all about riding a wave. So people seem to be excited about these things. So we should go hard on that. And if people want to be excited about.
Do you sense increasing civic engagement?
I don't know that I sense it necessarily, but I know that there are lots of opportunities to, if people really want to put their money where their mouth is, they can go work on these races. Again, there are going to be lots of races before November 18 that people can be talking about that are going to make a larger difference in people's lives and in their day-to-day and in their daily struggles. So if people who say they care about these things, if you truly care about them, then let's go work on all these other races.
I think elections reform is very important as well, so that you can take a look back at your elections and say, we didn't like how that worked, but maybe we can institute ranked voting. Maybe we can institute different ways of thinking about the election, of what didn't allow the conversation to happen. Maybe we don't allow national money to come into our local politics. I think there are a lot of things that we can be thinking about and conversations we should be having when we have the opportunity to change it. Because a lot of times you can get everybody fired up, they're ready to go, and you're ready to get people to the polls. Atlanta doesn't have a voter registration problem. We actually do quite well when it comes to voter registration. We have a turnout problem. And it's because 30 days before an election, it becomes toxic. And it's because you watch how the narrative completely switches from a grassroots narrative to a top-down, this is what's going to happen. And a lot of that is dictated by the rules that are set in place.
Let's talk a little bit more about the connection between past and present. I like what you're saying about structural change, but let's talk about how you leverage the wave or the current moment to actually make that happen. And you're an attorney and a historian. How does your perspective as a historian influence your vision for your organization in Detroit when you look forward, looking back and looking forward, when you think about where you want the Detroit Justice Center to go, using this moment to maybe take a great leap ahead?
So I think that my training as a historian helps me think of this in terms of intergenerational work. I like to take a really long-range view, and I get this from one of my mentors, Vince Warren, who's here in New York. He's the executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. And we were at the inaugural conference of Law for Black Lives a couple years ago, and he asked us, he said, 5 generations from now, what will black people thank us for? And it's such a beautiful question because it makes you think outside of this election cycle or the 3-year grant reporting period, all of that. And it really helps you check your activities on a moment-to-moment basis. Because 5 generations from now, no one will thank me for a Twitter battle that I win.
Oh, no.
Or a Facebook battle. And so I just leave all of that aside. But they might thank me for pouring love and energy into a young person, or building an institution that can carry a lot of people forward. Or they might not, but I think there's no harm in doing those things, So I think, that's what it is. I mean, it helps me think about what matters right now and what is going to have some reverberation.
They're certainly not going to be thinking about your Twitter battle.
They're not.
Definitely not. So, Daryl, that really comes to you because you are sharing these moments of Black history, right? So how does that help us think about the present and the future?
It's all connected. Nothing's new under the sun. And there are so many lessons that we can learn from what's already happened in the past. I mean, like, there's a person at 1600 Pennsylvania who is doing a lot of things. All the things. But he's not the first one to do bad stuff, right? Like, if we're going to be really real about it, that's what I'm so confused about all these conversations about him. Because I'm like, if we just look and read about what all these other folks have done in that office, it hasn't been that good for a while. And folks on our list and that are our subscribers know that, and they tell us that, and they're always talking about it. So I'm just so confused when everyone was like so aghast at like all these things that he's doing, when a lot of the people in our community that are reading our stuff every day are like, yo, it ain't been good for a minute. And so I think if we hear that and listen to it and accept it and acknowledge it and do something with that, then we can figure some things out.
And Push Black's been up since before the election.
Yeah. So we were around before the 2016 election,
right.
And we did a pretty big voter registration and get out the vote program in 2016, and had some interesting comments from a lot of our subscribers where they were telling us what they thought. And so, like, it's one thing to like watch the news. It's another thing. I mean, text message is pretty intimate, right? Like, these are people texting a stranger. Like, they don't know me, but like they're like texting back, saying what they really think. And I'm like, there was something going on where I'm seeing one thing on the news, I'm seeing another thing in our inbox, and they just weren't matching up.
And policy debate at the national level is stuck.
Sure.
It seems right now, right?
Yeah.
But in talking to the three of you, it really feels like there's such an opportunity for innovation and for movement and for change at the local level, at the grassroots level. So Rohit, why can't we move that forward and up to the national level? What is this horrible disconnect? Between the inbox and the national news, what's the problem?
One of my mentors said that it takes 10 years to get 10 years of experience, you gotta. This stuff takes time, and it is happening, but we're building it from the ground up. And I think, sometimes we can sound like pessimists of all the challenges that we see, but we are eternal optimists.
Yeah.
I used to, my grandparents would talk, or I would hear stories about my grandparents, and when the partition in India happened, my family moved from Pakistan back to India, and I heard about all the struggles that they had of getting just home. And similarly, friends who had to leave India to go back to Pakistan, what they went through to just get home. And I always used to hear those stories as a kid, and I said, man, if I was alive, I would have done something. I would have been so fired up. There's no question. I would have done something about it. And truth is, I'm alive. And right now there's something to be done. And I think that the immigrant story and the Black experience in Atlanta have a lot of interconnectedness, but also a lot of differences. Immigrants come to the United States often by choice. We can trace back our history. I'm, a little lost because I'm Indian in America, and I'm American in India, and but it's a really unique experience. But oftentimes the people who we talk to in Atlanta is what they know, right? That is who they are and what they live and what they breathe. And knowing our history is so important. But I feel very optimistic. I think that you have people who are saying, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to imperfectly do something about it. You have millennials who have run for office and lost, but then are still staying engaged and involved. There are people who went to the Women's March, but then actually started to show up at the school board meetings as well, right? There's a necessity for us to show up, learn more, and continue to realize this is one beautiful design, and we're going to have to keep reiterating. But we can't give up. I mean, I think that there's a beautiful struggle ahead, and we're just caught in it. I think it's personal for all of us.
I don't think you sound pessimistic at all. I think you sound like optimistic realists. Yeah. So you've been hearing throughout the day about time, the past, the present, the future. You just use the 10-year. I don't know if you realize you said 10 years.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to ask you about specific commitments. We gave you cards. In just a moment, we're going to ask you about specific commitments that you can make in the coming days, weeks, and months. But before we get to that, what advice, Amanda, would you have for people who want to get involved in a concrete way at their local level?
Lots of thoughts. So
that's a big, kind of broad question. So answer it in any way that you want.
Yeah. So often I have young people in particular who ask me about going to law school because they think they want to make change, so they should become a lawyer. And I said, if there's anything else that brings you joy, that you're passionate about, do that. Because we do not need more like half-hearted, unhappy lawyers. I thought about this in college. I was like, I need to be a development economist. And I would have been horrible. I would have been horribly unhappy. So, I think the key is figuring out what you are passionate about and deploying that for social change. So, for example, we have a new initiative, one of our Echoing Green cohorts, Data for Black Lives. So these are data scientists and mathematicians who were tired of seeing their professions and what they're passionate about weaponized against Black communities, and so decided that they were going to figure out how data scientists could show up and support community organizers. Some of the most active folks in the last few years in terms of putting sand in the gears of the death penalty have been pharmacists who refused to supply the drugs for executions. They were using their profession towards social change. Architects and designers saying, we refuse to design prisons. We will not design places of torture and despair, and instead we're going to design restorative justice centers. And so those are things that they are uniquely positioned and talented to do, and we need more of that. So as an attorney, yes, I can create the tip sheet on what are your rights as a protester, but in order to get them out, I need to hand it off to my friend, the graphic designer, to make it look gorgeous and make people want to read it. And so we just make this dream team of people who are bringing different talents. And so figuring out what makes you come alive and feel passionate and deploying that for social change.
I am going to turn to those cards in just a moment, but before I do, I want to ask each of you this year. Of course, our series with Echoing Green is called Citizenship Now. So I want to ask each of you what Citizenship Now means to you before we turn to our 10, 10, 10. It's called the 10 by 10 by 10 challenge. So what does Citizenship Now mean to each of you? I'm stalling to give you a moment to think. They asked me to give them the questions in advance, but we journalists never do that. I see Bridget Bergen over there, and she knows that's true. So we don't give you the questions in advance, but I think I've stalled long enough. So one of you want to volunteer to answer first, or shall I just pick on one of you?
I'm happy to go.
Go ahead.
So I
the
would
professor
say,
can always answer first.
To me, citizenship means making sure that we are dreaming big enough and keeping our imaginations turned on and imagining better futures outside of this moment that we're in right now. It means finding that right balance between staying informed and on top of what's happening, so not burying your head in the sand. I think we absolutely need to stay up to date on things like the Muslim ban, on ICE and deportations, and all these things that require urgent action on our part. But then knowing when to turn it off and knowing when it becomes this drain of energy and where we could better invest our attention elsewhere. And so for me, it's been about finding that balance between staying informed and doing the defensive work that's necessary, but also remaining on offense with our imaginations, because it's our ability to imagine a future outside of this that will get us to where we need to get. And so just not getting stuck in this reactive mode.
Yeah.
So on that point, I would say, folks, rather than watching the State of the Union tonight, yeah, well, I would say, like call up someone you love, tell them about the commitments that you're making tonight and that you want to be held accountable in those. And again, read the recap tomorrow, find out what he said. Don't bury your head in the sand, but also don't destroy your spirit when you could be building with people and actually taking concrete steps towards making these commitments happen.
I think we should just show up and we should do the work. I think that this is all hard stuff, but it's all like doable. I don't think any of it is impossible. And so I think that we should like take it very seriously and do the work and not just get caught up in like not productive things. So it's interesting, I run a digital organization, but I'm actually very much into like the offline, talk to folks, understand folks, and like really dig in and show up and do the work and just stop hiding behind stuff. So let's like just do that.
Excellent. Rohit.
I would say to just kind of humanize the journey a little bit, that it's okay, we're gonna mess up, but know that people are trying. We've become hypercritical over the course of the past few years, even in the airport that you were just talking about. People were so mad about one like human error that like had a line go a different way, and you just watched people's rage just come out about that. But then there were a couple of people who just said, it's all good. Like, don't worry, you're doing great. Like, and I think that it's hard because this journey is lonely. For the people who are fighting, it's really lonely. One of my favorite books is The Giving Tree. Spoiler alert, the story is so beautiful, right? It's about a young boy whose greatest moments in his life happen because of a tree. He finds, his best friends as a child under that tree. He carves things under that tree. He uses the tree to build his first home. When he gets divorced, he goes back to that tree. I'm telling the whole story, right? But but ultimately, by the end of it, after he's built his house, after he was done he's done everything he could, there was nothing left for that tree to give. And he's sitting at the stump of the tree saying, I have nothing to give you. That's my journey with the city of Atlanta. It's my giving tree. It's given me everything. It's where I have my best friends, my family. It's where my mom paid for me to make the basketball team. It's like, it is home. And I think that citizenship now means giving something back to the places and the people that give you everything you need to move forward. It's feeling a sense of responsibility to make sure you give something back before it turns into a stump that you sit on at the end of the day.
Lovely. I love that book. Lovely. I'm the moderator, but I'm actually going to say something about citizenship now. And I'm going to do it in recognizing my colleague, Bridget Bergen, who is here. I know she loves that. WNYC's Bridget Bergen actually broke a story this year about purged voters. I guess it was last year. And it was about voters purged from the rolls in Brooklyn. And I mention it because it ties in with something you said, Amanda. I think it's critically important. Tens of thousands of voters purged from the rolls in Brooklyn. And Jenny Yee from our data news team also worked on the story. Because it's about the need for us to be aware of what's happening in our government, to be able to participate in our democracy. So journalism is so critically important for democracy to be functioning, and that's journalism. That's real journalism, not just ripping and reading AP copy nightly on All Things Considered. That's journalism. That's investigation. That's what journalism is, and that's what keeps people informed so they can participate and know what's happening. But we also have to self-care. So you have to remain engaged, but I love what you said. You can't allow it to destroy your spirit. So that kind of reporting is what democracy requires, and that is citizenship now. Your engagement with that critically important journalism. So I just wanted to put in my little piece about Citizenship Now. Now, with that in mind, we want to hear about your sense of what Citizenship Now is. We asked you in our audience what you will be doing in 10 days. Do you have your little green cards? Green cards in the green space? I was supposed to wear green, I failed. So when you came in, you got the green cards. If you didn't get one, raise a hand and we can get you one. Janet, do you have some extras? There you go. I have a pen. Here you go. Okay, so we want you to write down what you will be doing to create social change in the next 10 days. 10 days. You're not writing. You already have it. Okay, I'll be calling on you. 10 days, 10 weeks, and 10 months. So 10 months is what? Who knows? November. Right? Midterm elections, right? 10 days, 10 weeks, and 10 months. Does anybody already have a goal for 10 days? Don't be shy. I said I was going to call on you, didn't I? Oh, yeah. Well, am I supposed to read your mind? And you have to tell us your name in a big, loud voice.
Hello, I am Jacob. My goal in the next 10 days is very specific, sorry. I want to look into data for Black Lives, as you mentioned, because I work at a bail fund and we're doing a lot of stuff around data right now. And so I want to see if we can coordinate efforts.
Excellent.
Yes, she and Lucas are cool people. When we know them, we can hook you up with them.
Yeah.
I'll come up to you after.
We'll put
and
you
ask
in touch. That's
Awesome.
excellent. And thank
Cool.
you for your work at the Bail Fund.
Thank you.
You could
Really
do that
important.
in one day.
Yeah, I'll
That's
do it.
fabulous.
I'll do it tomorrow.
Done. What else?
What are you doing in 2 days, Jacob? Thank you, Jacob, so much. Would you kindly pass the mic? Is it okay, Ricardo, if you pass the mic to the young woman? Yes. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma, and my action for the next 10 days is to learn more about my local news outlets and not rely on the New York Times daily briefing that I get and my Alexa. Good morning, Alexa. What's my flash briefing? And so I want to focus on first starting with WNYC because, to be honest, I had no idea it existed, and I've been in New York since college. So that's pretty awful. So I'm excited to look it up and hear from your voices and some of the others, and then look into other local publications to find about the elections and those sorts of topics that I, as a New Yorker, should really be interested in.
You can turn around and say hello to Bridget Bergen. She's one of the best reporters in this building. Say hi, Bridget. No, she was supposed to say hi to you, but that was good. Thank you so much. That's really fantastic. You can do that in 10 days. Yeah, it's a lot. There are a lot of great news outlets, actually, but that's fantastic. Anybody else want to get one more in the front row, please? This is great. It's my favorite part.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria. I'm actually a digital designer. I work in user experience, and I have been meeting with a group called Black Activists for Justice for Immigrants. And so we've had one initial meeting, and I've been meaning to schedule a follow-up and attend their meetings to kind of know how we can connect them, because a lot of the times their needs tend to be more, how do we get people to be able to donate to our site so we can, one of the things is swiping people in through Metro cards, because when people are often it's illegal to jump the turnstiles, and so they need people to give swipes so people can go through without having to shell out the money to pay if they're not able to. So I want to kind of continue building that relationship between me as a designer and them as a justice organization.
We should talk.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's a
Thank
great
you.
organization to support. Excellent.
So we're making connections as well as making commitments tonight. All right. Has anyone made a more mid-range goal or commitment for the next 10 weeks? So that would be between now and the middle of May.
Hi, my name is Michelle Berger, and I'm here with a colleague, Rachel, and we're going to run civic education classes in the New York Public Library under the name of Let's Talk Democracy. Great. and it's based on a model that we already ran in the Queens Public Library.
Wait, is that Rachel right there? Oh, because the woman next to you looked very confused and surprised. Wait, so you've decided this tonight while you've been sitting here?
No, we've been.
Oh,
that's
I was
why we're
amazed.
here.
Okay, so you're going to do this at which public library?
We're looking at a public library in East Harlem, and
Excellent.
after we pilot it there, we're looking at another public library in the Lower East Side,
Which public library on the Lower East Side?
Tompkins Square.
Boom! I grew up on the Lower East Side. That is fantastic. So when will the pilot happen?
The pilot is scheduled to happen starting in March, going
Excellent.
from March through April. Six-week classes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing that with us.
If you go to voteatl.org, we have a template and a lot of like cool things you can use and tools. Feel free to use any of that. It's all free and available to the public. It's voteatl.org as Atlanta. Stomp.
Anyone else? You who borrowed my pen, did you make a 10-week commitment?
Yeah, it's sort of a loose one, but yes.
I'll take it.
All right, my name's Cameron. Hello, everyone.
Can I have my pen?
Yes, you may. I don't have a 10-year one. I apologize for that. So my fiance is actually building a show about Asian American identity, and this is a nice plug. It's going to be
Now wait a minute.
LaGuardia, so New York right now. LaGuardia Performing Arts Center.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm actually doing some of the music and sound design for that, so that's part of my 10-week commitment. And that's going to be April 26th through 28th.
What is the show called?
It's called Neutral Ground, and it's sort of an ironic title.
That's awesome.
All right, we'll take it.
Thank you for your pen.
And thank you for your commitment. One more person with a 10-week commitment? Come on now. Yes, thank you.
Hello.
Oh, we've got two more 10-week commitments. We'll take two more.
My name is Sana Musasama. I'm a sculptor and an activist, and I work in Cambodia with former sex slaves. And I teach at Hunter College. It's my 24th year, and I always teach my activism the last few weeks of class because I think the topic is too strong for 20-year-olds, and they'll drop my class and I'll lose my salary. And I'm making a commitment that when I start teaching tomorrow night, I'm going to introduce me.
That's great.
We need more wholehearted people in the classroom, so I love that.
So the last, how many weeks do you?
16 weeks, and I will start teaching about my activism around the 14th week.
Last couple of weeks.
Yeah. But I'm going to start with it in the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. My name is Chaim Lazarus. This is Ben Goldman. We have a grassroots organization. It's called Superheroes Anonymous. And what it does is we try to take the mythology and the imagery and the ideas of superheroes and basically empower people and to teach people that they have power. So we do education, speak at schools and everything like that. But personally, we specialize in homeless outreach. So I'm not wearing my whole thing tonight, but we create our own superhero personas. I go out here in the streets. I go to the Bowery. I have an e-bike with a trailer. I create life packs. I give socks and toothbrushes and stuff to people in need around here. So we've been doing this for actually almost 10 years. But now with what's going on in the world, we're really trying to take it to the next level. So this is all kind of the 10 years, the 10 weeks I've written is really related to getting our board in order and really trying to take the civic engagement really to the next level. So that's kind of part of what we're here tonight about, is hopefully really change gears in a big way and really take off.
Superheroes Anonymous. That's pretty great. So that could be 10 weeks or 10 months.
I wrote it all.
Yeah. All right. So let's use that to segue to the 10-month commitment. That's the November point, right? I mean, we'd be a little past the election at this point, but does anyone have a 10-month commitment?
Cass Peters does.
You know I'm coming to you all if they don't have a 10-month commitment. Anyone? All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm
Hello.
Ada.
Hi, Ada.
And my 10-month commitment is to really find ways to donate my resources, whatever they are, in person in the next 10 months and by 10 months from now, because that is something that makes me really uncomfortable. And I think it's true. There are things that you can do, sitting in your bed on your laptop, but that is something I feel very comfortable doing, and no real change, in my opinion, ever came from a place of comfort. So I want to commit to changing that pattern that I have.
So like Daryl said, just show up.
Yeah. And make it less about how I feel,
Mm.
more about the work.
Good for you. More about the work. Anyone else? That was pretty special. Okay, how about y'all? 10 year? 10 year. I mean, 10. I know when I said it, I was like, 10 year. That must be a subconscious. So I was thinking about my 10-year plan. Bridget, don't tell anybody. Okay, 10 months. 10 years. Can you imagine 10 years where we're all going to be? Oh, gosh. 10 month. Come on, I warned y'all. Don't pretend like I didn't tell you I was coming to you for the 10 month.
You did.
I did.
You warned
Oh,
it, yes.
thank you.
You did. Mine is actually to attempt to write a piece of legislation. I think a lot of people don't realize that citizens can write legislation and it can suck, and that it gets put over to a committee who will rewrite it. So I'd like to write a piece of legislation on open data policy for the city of Atlanta. I think that information should be owned by people, and I think that information should be readily available for people whenever. So as as my own citizen and someone who lives in Atlanta, something I'd like to see. So I'm going to try to write it and give it to my council member to see if they'll actually introduce it.
Bravo.
New York just
Yeah.
passed that.
Awesome. Nice.
The first city in the United
The Atlanta of the
Right.
North. That's great. That's good to be in it. Yeah.
That'll be a T-shirt. A T-shirt.
Oh, for
The
sure.
Atlanta of
Yeah.
the North.
Yeah, it's the city of dreams.
New
It's
York,
the best city in the world.
Amanda.
Yeah. Well, mine is really kind of over the next 10 months. Maybe it's the 10 weeks to 10 months, but finding out who are some progressive women of color who I can support who are running for office this year, and how to support them. So with money, but also with time, whatever resources I have, and then hopefully 10 months from now, celebrating well with them and other people.
Great.
Yeah.
So there are like 100+ black women running for office this year. It's wild.
Nationwide, yeah.
Nationwide. And so we should be supporting all of them over the next 10 months. And I think that we just want to rock it out for 10 months. I think that this is going to be a crazy election. We had a very unusual election in 2016. I think this 18 one is going to be even more unusual. I don't think that we're ready for what it's going to be. And I want us to rock it out. I want our subscribers to rock it out. I want us to grow. I want us to figure some stuff out. I think this could be a watershed moment, but maybe not. I don't know. Depends if people show up. So we're here. We're ready. We want to do it. I think everybody here is all y'all here. So we all want to kind of do some shit. Excuse me.
That's all right. You're among friends.
You made it the whole time.
That's okay. That's okay. I do have a 10-year plan, and that's to have this partnership for 10 years.
That was good. That was
So,
good.
right?
That was good.
Cheryl Dorsey. Okay, last question. Are you hopeful?
Yeah.
Yeah? You hopeful?
I'm extremely hopeful. I think that this is going to be a hell of a year, and I think that it is. This road is really hard. I think this is really emotional work. But you can't be anything but hopeful in doing this. I put one of my 10-week goals as asking someone that I went to high school with that I've called a racist over the past, in my mind.
Those are the words, actually. You find them on Facebook.
But I actually think that we have gotten to a point where that's just the wrong thing to do. Because when you get to the core of it, people are hurting. They're really hurt. And I think that we have tucked we tucked away and threw under the rug how detrimental this recession was to people's lives, and how tough it was for cab drivers, for people who work in the service industry, for people who are just really struggling right now. And so I'm hopeful, because I think those stories are finally coming out, that it's a journey. It's not just a quick destination. So yeah, I'm extremely, extremely hopeful for my city and beyond. So.
Okay, I got 3 minutes. I'm one of these people who looks at the clock and always blows through my post. We call it a post in our business, blows through my time, but I'm going rogue. Does anybody have a question for this panel? Oh, yes, go. Sorry, team.
I'm sorry, I was getting
You gotta
shushed.
tell us your name.
My name is Jamira, and my question is in relationship, I think, to some of the comments that was put up. Because when I think about citizenship, I think about both your responsibility to yourself, but also the responsibility to the surrounding community. But what we saw with the last election, I think, is that many people were one-issue voters. And it was mostly a very personal issue to themselves. How do we get to a point where we don't allow like the division that's happening from the swamp to affect our ability to care for each other and to vote for policies and people that actually represent all our interests?
That's a great ending question. Team.
Trust black women. That's right.
Yeah.
So.
Worked in Atlanta.
I mean, awesome question. I mean, I think seeing the interconnectedness between a lot of issues. I mean, I think you use this word care. This is something where when I think about the connections between urban and rural areas in a state like Michigan, you know, a lot of it actually comes down to we all want the same thing in terms of being able to care for our loved ones. And so often it is, you know, systems like the prison system that keep us from being able to do that. You know, if we could imagine a system of more abundance that, you know, where we're able to, you know, actually have jobs and make good livelihoods, you know, healthcare, all these things at the end of the day, I think if we kind of do some reframing and think about our capacity to care for each other, we can start to have different conversations that kind of, you know, break out of traditional divides. And so I think, you know, that comes back to this question of really like thinking more deeply alongside other people that you're in deep relationship with and having more complicated conversations than tend to happen.
I think that, you know, we super polarize people, or you're on this team or you're on that team. And if you take that team, you know, I'm going to throw jabs at you. And every jab that we take during an election cycle and during those moments come back to bite us in the part where we're trying to rebuild trust. And I think that we have to get back to not just turning thoughts into memes or allowing outside people to dictate the conversation, to allow the conversation to actually flow from the bottom up. Our mayor in Atlanta, rather than having a conversation about her qualifications to be mayor, we were talking about, you know, whether she was black enough or whether she was democratic enough. Rather than saying she served as a judge, she actually was a city council member. She has actually been there fighting for certain pieces of legislation. She's from the SWATs. Like there is. But instead, it was we were asking, well, who are T.I. and Killer Mike voting for, right? Because that's the only thing that we think people are thinking about. But people are not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. Millennials are not a monolith. A lot of times people say, what should we be doing to get millennials more engaged? Well, I don't know, because I got some really weird millennial friends, some really smart millennial friends, some really like, you know, I just go out with them millennial friends. Like, we're not a monolith. So I think breaking through, being the tokenized voice in the room, kind of to your advice, bring someone else in the room with you, is so important, because we've been able to just categorize people based on a singular identity as opposed to the multifaceted identities that we all have. We're not just what you see. There are layers and layers to us as people. And I think until we get to that, we are going to constantly be putting each other in a box on this team or the other.
What did work there, though, that you did, was to have those conversations with those candidates. What did not work ultimately was breaking through the divisiveness at the end.
And people tipping the scales with tools that they know can disproportionately change an election. Everyone knew that there was going to be low voter turnout. That's what a lot of people are banking on. We had candidates tell us that straight up. Well, we know there are not going to be a lot of people who vote, but ultimately we have to make decisions based on the people who show up and vote. And that is so concerning for me, that a tweet of whether your voice matters or not from a person who is respected can change the game. When Killer Mike decided to endorse somebody, and Killer Mike's a friend, right? He is somebody who I've grown to respect, but he's got militant views on a lot of things. But when people discount the voice of people who we don't listen to, like artists, they don't realize that can sway an election. When Toni Morrison so eloquently said after the Great Depression, this is precisely the time when artists go to work. And right now, creatives, I believe, have a responsibility to bring their art out so we can have conversations in a way that we haven't, just like Killer Mike did in this election. But yeah, we have polarized people in a really, really stressful way. And I hope we can go back to the deep-rooted conversations.
Well, I want to thank all of you for a very, very deep-rooted conversation here tonight. One that I think has inspired everyone in this room to work toward change. And I think you're willing to stick around and talk with some folks who said they wanted to make some connections with you.
Yes,
so please, if you do want to make those connections, come on up. And thank you all so much for your participation, for your attentiveness, and for your willingness to engage. And we do, I have to say, February 6th, a week from tonight, is the next one of our conversations. It's going to be about activating change toward education. So please feel free to join us, and we're going to have 2 more conversations each one of the Tuesdays after that. I want to say a very special thank you to Cheryl Dorsey, who's hiding over there in the corner. Thank you so much to Cheryl Dorsey and the wonderful folks at Echoing Green. Thank you for this partnership. We are so grateful. And also, again, to our fellows tonight, Rohit Malhotra, founder and executive director of CCI, the Center for Civic Innovation in Atlanta. Amanda Alexander, founder of the Detroit Justice Center. And Daryl Scott, co-founder and executive director of Push Black. Good night, everybody.